Hello and welcome to this video on changing family patterns, partnerships, childbearing and lone parent families. In terms of partnerships, we're first going to consider cohabitation. Cohabitation can be defined as a couple in a sexual relationship living together but not married. There are 2.9 million cohabiting heterosexual couples in Britain today. 1 in 8 are now cohabiting, double the number in 1996. 70,000 same-sex cohabiting couples currently reside in the UK, and a fifth of all cohabitants are serial cohabitants. That is to say that they have moved in with someone, been in an exclusive sexual relationship with that person, then maybe moved out after the relationship has ended, and then moved in with a different person in a new exclusive sexual relationship, hence serial cohabitant. The reasons for the increase in cohabitation are manyfold. Firstly, living together is no longer stigmatized or seen as a negative thing in our society. It's no longer socially unacceptable. Younger people accept cohabitation much more. It's seen as the norm today. Many women now have careers and no longer need the security of marriage, so they're less likely to seek marriage at an early age. It's something people are putting off for much later. Secularization means that although traditional religions frown upon cohabitation, often seeing it as living in sin, their influence has declined, and so this does not impact the way people view cohabitation. However, many couples see cohabitation as a trial marriage, in fact. It may be seen as a way of practicing or testing the strength of a relationship or how a relationship is going to work out in view of perhaps at some point getting married in future. The decision to have children often propels cohabiting couples into marriage. So it may be that a cohabiting couple fall pregnant and therefore decide, oh, time to get married. Or alternatively, they think to themselves, well, we do want to have children and we'd like to do that within the confines of marriage, often because there may be questions around, when a child is born, whose name is it going to take, that sort of thing. And if you've got married, you've kind of solved those problems before the baby is born. For some couples, it is a permanent arrangement based more on equality and sharing than traditional marriage. There may be a fear that actually a marriage could lead to a power dynamic developing because of the traditional norms that influence people within our society, and so by remaining in a cohabitation situation, there's a more kind of equal footing because both partners know they could leave at any time and that there's no contractual obligation to stay together. In terms of same-sex relationships, approximately 5 to 7% of adults in the UK have same-sex relationships. Social attitudes to same-sex relationships have changed dramatically. In the past, it is worth remembering not only was it frowned upon, it was in fact illegal in the United Kingdom. Today, however, that is no longer the case. It is not only legal, it is much more acceptable. The law has also changed to make same-sex relationships more easy. So, for example, in the 1967, homosexuality was decriminalised. As I said, it was previously criminal, now it's no longer the case. And since 2002, cohabiting gay couples have had the same rights as heterosexual couples, and since 2014, same-sex couples have been able to marry. This has led to many stable same-sex relationships, which are now effectively marriages, relationships where both partners make firm commitments over a long period of time to each other, and this has given the rise to new forms of family. So again, this kind of feeds into that family diversity discussion and debate. Weeks further found and argued that increased social acceptance of homosexuality and same-sex relationship is causing same-sex relationships to behave more like heterosexual relationships, which perhaps wasn't the case in the past. We also find that homosexuals increasingly create kinship networks, so sort of family networks or chosen families amongst people they may not only be related to, but people they're not related to. So friends may become part of their kinship networks, and this mirrors what we find within heterosexual relationships where when a couple come together and they get married, they inherit, as it were, each other's families, and that becomes part of a much larger kinship network. Because same-sex marriage is so new, historically roles within relationships were negotiated. So if we imagine, two men or two women in a relationship, because there were no traditional roles for both those individuals, because they're both either male or female, they were having to negotiate and work out who was going to do what. And so this is something which is, carrying on in same-sex marriages today, and where this is headed we don't know, but we are finding perhaps more traditional patterns starting to emerge where, one of each member of the relationship will take on either a more kind of traditional masculine or feminine role. One sociologist found that some gays and lesbians are concerned with the new marriage framework. That's because they fear it might limit their freedom and flexibility. Within the homosexual community, we did tend to find that there were different norms and values with regards to freedom and liberty and the flexibility with how relationships worked. As marriage becomes a new norm within that community, this may undermine that flexibility, and we may find more kind of stable, settled, heterosexual-like type relationships and structures beginning to form. Next, one-person households. One of the things we found in the UK is that there's been a big rise in those living alone. In 2013, 3 in 10 people, roughly 7.7 million people, now live alone. 40% of all one-person households are over 65. So this is something that is happening to the elderly or the older members of our society. By 2033, it's predicted that over 30% of the adult population will be single, and that is to say unpartnered and never married, and therefore probably living alone also. In terms of the reasons for these patterns, well, they are manifold. Firstly, the rise in divorce has led to more people living alone. If they have children, they will normally live with the mother, leaving the father as a single household. So we do tend to find, at least amongst the younger members of this lone person household living style, that they tend to be male, although over 65 we tend to find increasingly they're more female. The fall in the numbers marrying, so we now have more remaining single just generally. For many, this is now a lifestyle choice. They're choosing to be bachelors or bachelorettes for the majority of their lives. One partner might die. So as there are more older people today, and we're thinking here about demography, there are more people living alone. And as I said previously, over the age of 65, this tends to be women because we know women generally live longer than men. About 10% of those living alone are actually in a relationship but not have moved in with their partner. And this is known as living apart together, or LAT. So we're talking here about two individuals who are in a relationship, completely committed and exclusive to each other. However, they've made the decision not to move in together, not to live together, not to cohabit, or perhaps even to marry. And so they are living apart together. And there may be various reasons. For example, wanting to keep their own home, because of the way postmodern society and economies have worked out. People have to work very hard to save large amounts of money to buy their own place. And once they've got it, they may be loath to let go of it. Even if that is with a view to selling it and their partner selling their property and moving in together, they may be quite pleased or happy with their independence. They may also not want to fully commit. They may be entrenched in a lifestyle whereby they don't fully commit, and having that freedom and flexibility might be important to them. Next, we need to consider childbearing, and we have a number of sort of key headlines here from a range of different sources. So the BBC News reported in 2012 that the proportion of children born out of wedlock, that is outside of marriage, rose in 2012 for the 40th consecutive year to 47.5%. By 2016, which has now been and gone, it is expected to rise to more than 50%. So in future, we are now expecting, or we would view that the norm would become that most children will be born outside of marriage. The trend towards older motherhood is continuing, reported the BBC in 2013, with the average age of mothers in England and Wales reaching 30 for the first time. And again, this is likely to continue to rise in future. The number of children a woman has in the UK has fallen from 2.95 in 1964 to 1.85 in 2014. So again, this ties into that demography argument. Women are having less children. Around 1/5 of women are childless at the age of 45, which we know is normally the age at which most women will cease to be able to have children. That is to say, they reach the menopause. And this is predicted to be 1/4 of women by 2018, which is very soon indeed. Next, we need to consider lone parent families. These make up 24% of all families. Of that 24%, 90% are lone mothers. So really, when we're talking about lone parent families, we're talking about single mother families. Until the 1990s, divorced women made up the larger percentage. So we're talking about women who have been married, had children, the marriage has come to an end, they've become divorced, and the children have come with them. Since the 1990s, however, we've seen a shift, and now those lone mothers are generally never married women. That is to say, they had a child outside of wedlock and they have never been married. So that's a big shift, a big change. And it kind of mirrors those changes that we've seen in marriage and divorce. A child living with a lone parent are twice as likely to live in poverty. And so that's something we need to be aware of. It's very important, in particular from the perspective of governments or legislators who are looking to implement policies that are going to support members of our society or change the way our society operates. In terms of the reasons for the increase, again, they are multifaceted. We know that there's been an increase in separation and divorce and never married women, and so perhaps we're going to just naturally see a larger number of lone parent families as a result. We've also seen a decline in stigma to births outside marriage. It's now the norm, in fact, that most children would be born outside marriage, and whereas in the past that child would have been considered illegitimate, that is to say not a full member of society, and the mother and the child would have been looked down upon, and there would have been a whole range of very nasty epithets used to describe the child. Today that's just simply not the case. It's far more normalised, far more accepted, and we see this reflected in our media. In the past, due to a death of a parent, that was often the reason why perhaps we found that there were more lone parent families. So, maybe dad died perhaps whilst at work, and we need to remember that the world of work was far more dangerous. Also, infectious disease was rampant in the past, especially prior to the establishment and the proliferation of the NHS in the UK. And so perhaps a parent dying was a far more normal reason for there to be lone parent families. And this is now not so much of an issue. People are less likely to die younger, and the NHS is far better at treating people, and our workplaces are far safer more generally. In terms of why we might find that most lone parent families are female-headed, well, women are often seen as nurturing. It's this ongoing belief that women are naturally maternal, and so in a situation where you have a divorce, often courts will decide, well, those children really should go with mum. So that's why perhaps we see that occur. Men are also less willing to give up work for childcare, and so again, perhaps that leads women to be more likely to assume the key parent role when a relationship ends or when a parent dies and that sort of thing. We also find that increasingly, according to Wemvoirs, mothers are single by choice, that actually, they're professional women. They find that they can not only support themselves, but they can support a child, and they want a child, and they don't necessarily feel they need the father's involvement. And so as a result of that, they may be purposely choosing to be single, to be a single parent, to be a lone parent. Cashmore found that women are also able to rely upon benefits. And so again, they do not feel that they have to perhaps stay in a relationship or start a relationship or be in a relationship at all with a man or with another partner in order to support the child and themselves. They can do it alone with the support of the state. It is worth being aware of the work here of a very interesting individual known as Charles Murray, who's a key proponent of the neoliberal New Right. And he had lots to say on lone parenthood, the welfare state and poverty. So Murray believes that the rise in lone parenthood is the result of an overgenerous welfare state, that this has created a perverse incentive for people to have children and to rely upon the welfare state, and this has created a dependency culture. And may be worth taking a moment now just to pause and consider what those key phrases or terminology means. He also advocates, therefore, the abolition of welfare for single parents. He believes that if we get rid of it, we're less likely to see these types of parents and these types of families, and that would be a good thing, according to the neoliberal New Right, and obviously Charles Murray as a proponent of it. In terms of criticisms of his work, well, we need to remember that 60% of lone parents are actually employed. They're not necessarily relying upon the state entirely in order to be able to look after themselves and their children. There is also a lack of affordable childcare generally in our society, and that could be one of the reasons why people are having to rely upon the state. And in the UK, we do find that the state is regularly having to come up with new policies around tax and around handouts in order to subsidise this very expensive sector. Women also still earn less than men. If we could get to a point where perhaps women were earning the same as men, perhaps they'd be less likely to rely upon the state. And also it's worth remembering that often fathers tend to neglect their role and to pay maintenance to their ex-partners or their ex-wives who are raising their children. And so perhaps if the law or the criminal justice system was better at enforcing the law and ensuring that men were paying their way, perhaps we'd see less welfare dependency overall. That's it. Thank you very much.